There is a bold promise circulating through the farming world that says you can replace an entire acre of pasture with nothing but plastic trays and a light bulb. It sounds like a daydream, infinite feed with zero land. But before you sell the tractor, we need to find out if this system is a genuine farm saver or just an expensive way to grow water. The 6 square foot promise. Just 6 square feet of light-emitting diodes can supposedly grow 12 pounds of green fodder in a single week. For farmers staring at empty pastures or watching the price of hay climb higher than the barn roof, that promise sounds like pure relief. These indoor systems claim they use 1/10 the water of a traditional field, require zero land, and can feed your animals year-round, even when the snow is piled high against the fence post. Instead of acreage and irrigation, it is trays, lights, and water. A system that fits in a shed can deliver steady feed when nothing outside is growing. On paper, it looks incredible. About 1/10 the water use, no soil loss, and predictable growth, no matter the weather. But somewhere between the glossy brochure and the actual barn, things get complicated. The question is whether that promise holds up once you actually add seed, power, and time to the equation. It is easy to grow grass on paper, but in the real world, margins are thinner than ever. So let us test it. How close can these fancy lights really come to replacing the humble bale of hay? The high price of winter. Every farmer knows that sinking feeling of walking into the hay barn in February and seeing more empty floor than stacked bales. But lately, filling that space back up costs nearly double what it used to. In the real world, hay prices are up 40 to 100% across much of the United States. It is a brutal combination of bad luck and hard economics. Drought has shortened cutting cycles, scorching the fields before they can even reach their prime. Diesel fuel has doubled hauling costs, meaning every mile that truck drives bites a little harder into your wallet. And fertilizer, the lifeblood of green pastures, still has not come back down to earth. Margins on feed are thinner than they have ever been. For the big commercial operations, it is a headache. But for small farms, winter can mean the difference between breaking even or falling behind. That is exactly why more producers are looking away from the frozen fields and experimenting with indoor fodder. Instead of acreage and irrigation, they are betting on trays, lights, and water. When the price of a simple square bale starts to feel like a luxury, you start looking for any way to keep the animals fed without losing the farm. But before you trade your tractor for a grow light, you need to understand exactly how this new pasture works. The indoor pasture, the setup. Before we had digital timers and hydroponic pumps, sprouting grain was usually something that happened by accident when a feed sack got left out in the rain. But today, what was once a mistake has become a precise science. A fodder system is not complicated magic. It is simply controlled germination. You start by soaking barley or wheat seed for 12 hours, softening the hull and waking up the life inside. Then, you spread about 2 pounds of that damp seed across a plastic tray and give it exactly what it craves: light, warmth, and steady moisture. It is a simple recipe, but the results feel almost instantaneous. In just 6 days, that barren tray transforms into a bright green mat, thick with growth. You get the roots, the stems, and the fresh sprouts all in one tangled living block. Each tray sips about 1.5 gallons of water and relies on 100 watts of light to mimic the sun. By the end of the cycle, you will harvest around 12 pounds of fresh, lush fodder. It looks like a miracle of abundance, green and heavy in your hands. But before you get too excited about all that weight, there is a catch hidden inside those wet leaves that most new growers miss. The water weight trap. It looks incredibly heavy when you haul it out of the tray, lush and dripping with water like a slice of spring pasture. But old-timers know you do not pay for water. You pay for what sticks to the ribs. That 12-pound mat of greenery is deceiving. If you were to bake all the moisture out, you would find that it equals only 2 pounds of dry matter. If you put that lush mat in a dehydrator, you would be left with a handful of straw. That is the key metric most folks miss when they look at the glossy charts. You are not replacing hay pound for pound, and if you try, your animals will starve with full bellies. It is a supplement meant to be used correctly. Its real job is to stretch your stored hay supply, add digestible nutrients, and smooth out feed quality when the pastures outside are dormant and gray. It keeps the gut moving and the animals happy, but it is not a calorie-for-calorie swap for dried roughage. If you are banking on this system to eliminate your hay bill entirely, the math simply will not hold up. The water adds weight, but it does not add energy. So the volume might be an illusion, but the nutrition is real. However, once you look past the water weight, you have to ask yourself if the price tag makes sense for what remains, especially when you factor in the one cost that never appears on the receipt: the time tax, hidden labor. On paper, the numbers look almost too good to be true. A few pennies for water, maybe 80 cents for barley seed, and you are in business. But there is one cost the glossy brochures always seem to forget to mention, and that is your time. Labor is the real hidden cost of indoor farming. It is not a set-it-and-forget-it operation. It takes about 10 minutes every single day to soak the fresh seed, rinse the heavy trays, and haul the finished feed out to the waiting animals. You do that every morning, 7 days a week, rain or shine. If you value your own sweat at even a modest rate, that 10 minutes adds $3 to $5 to the daily ledger. That is the sharp difference between a neat idea and a sustainable business model. When you add it all up, seed, power, and labor, you are looking at roughly $4 a day to produce 12 pounds of wet fodder. At that rate, a single rack costs about $120 a month to operate. For a 10-goat dairy, that is roughly equal to the cost of half a ton of hay. But you are not just paying for calories here. You are trading field time for tray time, and for some folks, that trade buys something even more valuable than grass: buying consistency. Farming has always been a high-stakes gamble against the weather. One year you are flush with sweet grass up to your knees, the next, you are scraping dust and praying for a cloud to break. Indoor fodder offers something rare in this life: absolute certainty. It does not care if there is a blizzard howling outside, or a drought that has turned the entire county brown. When you walk into that shed, you know exactly what you have, day after day. You are buying consistency, not just volume. That is why this system is showing up first on micro dairies and heritage homesteads, rather than massive commercial row farms. For a dairy farmer, a sudden drop in feed quality means a drop in the milk pail, and that is a loss they simply cannot afford. By supplementing with fresh greens, they keep production steady even in the dead of winter. Now, compare that to traditional hay. Good grass hay usually runs 12 to 18 cents per pound of dry matter. That is more than a tenfold difference in feed cost compared to the indoor method. So, if you look purely at the math, indoor fodder does not replace hay. Well, not yet. But cost is never the whole story in farming. The real value shows up in what happens inside the animal, where the equation starts to shift from simple dollars to actual biology. The sprouting alchemy, nutrition. Most folks think feed is just filler, something to keep a belly full and a rumen working through the long night. But something quiet and almost magical happens when a dormant seed wakes up and starts to grow. It stops being a hard little stone and becomes a living plant. On paper, LED fodder looks expensive, but nutritionally, it pulls weight where a bale of hay simply cannot. When barley sprouts, it typically tests between 15 and 18% crude protein, which is higher than most mid-grade grass hay you will find on the market today. But the real secret is not just the protein numbers, it is the energy. During germination, the tough starches locked inside the grain are converted into simple sugars. This process unlocks a vault of nutrients, delivering live enzymes and vitamin E that a dry grain sack can never match. The effect is not more bulk, it is better feed conversion. It is the difference between surviving and thriving. The animals digest it easier, absorbing more of the nutrition from everything else they eat. It turns the winter ration into something alive. You can talk about enzymes and vitamins all day, but most farmers do not have time for scientific theories. They trade in hard results, and the only proof that really matters is what ends up in the bucket at the end of the chore. The milk pail test. You can argue with a spreadsheet until you are blue in the face, but you cannot argue with the milk bucket. When the green trays come out, the animals know the difference, and the results show up where it counts. Livestock trials from Utah State and the University of Melbourne both found that dairy animals fed on fodder gained roughly 10 to 15% more milk output. Crucially, they achieved this bump with no change in their total feed intake. It was not about stuffing the animal with more calories. It was about making every calorie count. The live enzymes and high digestibility of the sprouts help the animal process the base ration more effectively. It acts like a spark plug for the metabolism, burning the fuel cleaner and hotter. You see the difference before you even check the pail. Within a few weeks, coats get slicker and shinier, and eyes look brighter and more alert. It also reduced pellet or grain use by about a quarter in some trials. You are not replacing hay, but you are improving how well the expensive stuff is digested, so the quality is undeniably there. But even with higher yields in the bucket, you still run into the physical limits of how much you can grow under a roof. In the old days, if you wanted more grass, you bought the neighbor's field. Today, we are learning to stack our fields one on top of the other. The vertical acre. In the old days, if a farmer wanted to double his harvest, he usually had to mortgage the farm to buy the neighbor's back 40. Today, the solution is not to look out at the horizon, but to look up. We are slowly learning to stack our pastures one on top of the other, turning a corner of the garage into a vertical acre. Even in strict university trials, the yield per square foot caps at around 0.35 pounds of dry matter a day. That number sounds small until you realize it is roughly 115 times the feed density of an acre of standing alfalfa. It is a condensed, turbocharged way to grow. You have total control over every leaf. There are no grasshoppers stripping the crop, no July droughts turning the fields to straw, and no hauling bales through a muddy gate in a freezing rainstorm. It is farming without the friction of nature. But condensing a field into a closet requires a different kind of discipline. You are not walking fence lines anymore. You are managing a tight, dense factory of growth. It sounds perfect for maximizing production, but there is a physical limit to how much green stuff you can haul. For beef cattle, the economics rarely pencil out. They simply eat too much volume, and the labor required to keep those troughs full would bury you. But for small ruminants, poultry, and rabbits, the payoff can be real. The little guys target animals. You are not trying to replace their hay. You are targeting the most expensive part of their ration, the protein and vitamins, with something you can grow year-round. 6 square feet of growing space, about the footprint of a small kitchen table, can feed 3 goats or 30 laying hens per day. Scale that to a standard 4-shelf rack, and you are producing around 15 pounds of fodder daily. That is enough to supplement 1 dairy cow or a full pen of small livestock through the harsh off-season. It turns a corner of the shed into a high production zone. It does not require a brand new building to get started, but it does need a controlled microclimate. You cannot just toss a rack of wet grain in a drafty barn and expect a miracle. Seeds are like babies, and they need a warm, steady place to thrive. The drafty barn, microclimate. You cannot just toss a rack of wet grain in a drafty barn and expect a miracle to happen overnight. Seeds are like newborn livestock. If they are shivering, they are not growing. A fodder system does not require a shiny new building, but it does demand a controlled microclimate that is clean, warm, and out of direct drafts. Old milk rooms with peeling white paint and damp concrete floors, insulated corners of a main barn, or a small greenhouse bay work well for this purpose. The secret ingredient here is not just the temperature, but the airflow. Humidity management is critical. Without good air circulation, the moisture hangs heavy and stagnant, turning your lush garden into a breeding ground for rot. Power is the main operating cost of the whole setup, and most of that money actually goes toward maintaining warmth rather than light intensity. If your barn already stays above 50 degrees, your lighting costs drop by half because the system is not wasting energy trying to heat up cold plastic. It is a delicate balance of physics and biology. But the electric meter spins fast when you are trying to cheat winter. The smart farmer knows that heat is something you can harvest for free if you look in the right places. The heat scavenger. That is why the best setups are scavengers. By pairing a fodder rack with a greenhouse bay or a simple south-facing window, natural daylight handles half the work for you. This lowers your power use and reduces the heat buildup inside enclosed spaces. Some innovative producers even pair their racks with compost heat or pipe in the warm exhaust from a nearby chick brooder to offset the electricity further. It is about working with what you have. If your barn already stays above 50 degrees, your lighting costs drop by half because the system is not wasting energy as artificial heat. To make the math work, you have to use every advantage you can find. The water that drains off these plastic trays is not just waste. It is a nutrient-rich tea that the rest of your farm is thirsty for. The circle of life, waste and tea. Every cycle, the runoff carries dissolved nutrients, enzymes, and sugars washed from the sprouting seed. Instead of dumping it down the drain, smart farmers catch it and put it back to work. It acts as a mild, micro-rich fertilizer, carrying about 15 to 30 parts per million of nitrate and nitrogen. It is weak, sure, but it is enough to green up seedling trays faster than standard water ever could. Even the solid waste has value. The old root mats can be tossed to the chickens or composted directly, where they break down fast and add vital texture to the pile. At its best, a fodder system becomes part of a regenerative cycle. Grain turns into fodder turns into manure, and manure turns back into soil. It is not replacing your pasture, it is extending the biology that drives it. But for all its promise, there is a ghost in the machine, a silent killer that can turn a week of hard work into a slimy, sour mess. The mold monster. It is the ghost in the machine, the one thing that can turn a week of hard work into a slimy, sour mess. Mold does not negotiate. Even a single contaminated tray can seed spores through the entire system, wiping out a whole week of growth in 48 hours. Cleanliness is not optional here. It is the difference between growing feed and growing garbage. If you miss a single spot, by Tuesday the whole room will smell like a wet gym bag, and your investment will be rotting. Every tray needs daily rinsing and rotation, and the system itself needs full sanitation between cycles. But the problems do not stop at the edge of the plastic tray. High humidity leads to corrosion on metal racks, and poor air quality in small barns if you ignore the ventilation. And scaling up does not simplify the job, it multiplies it. Each additional rack adds more trays to soak, rinse, feed, and scrub. You are not automating the feed chore, you are trading field time for tray time. Labor does not drop as the system grows, it compounds. The trade only makes sense if the nutrition or independence you gain is worth more than the hours you will spend scrubbing plastic. So, after looking at the costs, the labor, and the risks, can you really hang up the hay hooks and rely on a light switch? The answer, like most things in farming, is a hard maybe. The final balance, verdict. No, indoor fodder will not replace hay on any real commercial scale. If you are running 1,000 head of cattle, you are better off sticking to the round bales and the diesel tractor. But, strictly speaking, yes, it can replace up to 40% of your grain bill, improve feed conversion, and keep your animals healthier through the dark winter months when fresh feed is just a memory. The returns show up fastest for the little guys, the dairy goats, the breeding stock, and the backyard poultry flocks. If you are feeding a few milkers, a single homemade rack might be one of the best $100 projects you build all year. It earns its keep especially well in high-altitude or desert operations, where water is scarce and trucking hay costs more than the hay itself. It is not a silver bullet that fixes a broken business model, but it is a sharp tool to have in the shed. If you have the patience for the daily rinse, it might just be the greenest thing you see until spring returns. It is not just about saving money. It is about looking at a blizzard outside and knowing your animals are eating fresh greens because you made it happen. If you found a kernel of truth in today's harvest, do us a favor and leave a link to help us reach more folks. And if you want to keep reclaiming these forgotten tools of independence, go ahead and subscribe. We have plenty more work to do.